How's it going, guys? Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Phil Talk Sports Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Phil Nunziata. On today's episode, I am joined by play-by-play announcer Nick Rice. We will discuss the breaking news of the NBA resuming play in July. They will have a regular season, a playoff, and finally crown a champion for the season. On top of that, we will bring up a little project that we have in the works known as the Dream Season Football League. What is it, its history, and why you should be excited about it. All this and more on today's episode. Hope you enjoy. Joining me now all the way from California, a longtime friend of mine, an NCAA play-by-play announcer, and the commissioner of the Dream Bowl. What is that? You'll find out soon. But joining me, Nick Rice. Nick, how you doing, man? Good to hear from you.
Doing very good. And I say very good because of what we're about to get into and the fact that we have something to get into.
Yeah, I mean, I think the light is finally at the end of the tunnel, and sports are starting to come back, and I don't mean baseball in Korea or soccer in Germany. Like, sports in America is finally starting to shed light on returning, and especially the news that dropped maybe an hour ago that we're about to get into. But before we do that, I mentioned you're from California. You're a diehard Chargers fan, even though they're no longer in San Diego. And I still call them the San Diego Chargers. I can't help myself. Like, I don't even try to call them LA anymore. I gave up on that. But we talked about the draft in my last episode, but I still wanted to get your thoughts of the Chargers taking quarterback number 6 overall. Justin Herbert, we'll get right into it here, out of Oregon. As a Charger fan, how did you feel about that?
Well, first of all, I not only mess up with that, but I think everybody messes up with San Diego Chargers. It's amazing. It's the only team, it seems, where people still don't even know whether we're really in LA. Like, the news still hasn't hit for some reason, and it's the same case with me. And then second of all, I was such a diehard San Diego Chargers fan that I went to multiple Chargers games every year until I'd say about the mid-2010s. That was just a couple years before they moved to Los Angeles, where life got really busy and I didn't go. And then when I was able to go, of course, the emotions. And I think everybody, if they were to be honest with themselves, would admit that they're still a little bitter about the move to L.A. With that said, Justin Herbert drafted with the 6th overall pick, the third quarterback taken, and in my opinion, the third best quarterback available among those three, was an interesting selection. I actually initially was very emotional about it, feeling as though Justin Herbert was a pretty big reach, and I still believe that it was a reach, in my opinion, but I've come around a little bit looking at his college tape, his college numbers, nearly 100 touchdown throws in 4 years as starting quarterback of Oregon, along with Bull Wynn during his senior season. I think Justin Herbert, 6'6", scrambler, also a pretty solid pocket passer. He can throw just about any pass on the field. I think he's a good quarterback, but I do believe that if you're looking for a home run, I don't believe that this is your answer. But it addresses a need, and, I mean, there's almost no bigger need on a pretty talented football team than a quarterback, and that was what they did.
Yeah, you mentioned the emotions of it, and some of it has to be that for the first time in your adult life, really, the Chargers are led by a guy not named Philip Rivers. I'm sure that has to play into it, too, a little bit.
Oh, definitely. I don't think they really wanted to address quarterback this year because there were years late in Philip Rivers' career, such as Deshaun Watson being available a few years ago, where the Chargers wound up taking his teammate, Mike Williams. This was in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. I think Los Angeles wanted Philip Rivers to retire a Charger because there were multiple opportunities for them to take a quarterback, and they passed on it. And, you got to appreciate them at least having the loyalty of keeping one of the best quarterbacks in franchise history. I personally believe this will create some controversy, but he is the best quarterback in Charger history. And there have been some great ones and some Super Bowl appearers on our roster, but I think Philip Rivers was the best we ever had.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see him in that Colts blue and what he's able to accomplish in Indianapolis. My quick thoughts on Justin Herbert, I kind of mentioned this in my draft breakdown episode, but while he might have been the third best available quarterback, in a weird way, he's also the safest because he's the only guy with a full 4-year body of work that you're looking at. Obviously, with Joe Burrow, probably greatest single season of all time, but he was just that. He had one amazing season that you're basing his talent off of. Tua, obviously, national championship caliber quarterback, but has the injuries. So, like, they have all these pluses and minuses, and then you have Justin Herbert, who's just a solid, way above average, great player. So, in a way, while, it's not the sexiest pick or the shiniest penny in the drawer, it also seemed like the safest quarterback that they could have ended up with.
And the funny thing is, very rarely do you get those super big pluses, super big minuses. Do they wind up being the super big plus? Usually they wind up being somewhere in the middle. But when you look across the board of all the great quarterbacks, usually you look at their college resume as good, not great, which is what Justin Herbert was. Of course, Tom Brady, everybody just dismissed him coming out of the NCAA. Otherwise, he would have went higher than the 6th round. But you think about the quarterbacks available recently of, Deshaun Watson, you think solid, but for some reason he fell. Just teams weren't blown away by his tape, unlike a Tua, who they were blown away with, and, of course, Burrow, who they were blown away with. And, across the board, Wentz, that's your guy. Solid tape, but, he went to a small school, so
sure.
You keep going down the list. I think Justin Herbert falls in that category where people don't drop their jaw over his tape, but it seems like usually players like that wind up being wildly successful. So I guess there still is a pretty good chance that he could be that. My only hesitation with Justin Herbert is that he lasted all 4 years in college. Usually you see a guy come out in 3, and for a school such as Oregon, in the Pac-12 hasn't necessarily been the conference of champions, even though they used to be.
Sure.
For Oregon not to be more successful and almost never even being discussed as a playoff team in the NCAA causes some concern for me. If you couldn't win the Pac-12, how are you going to win in the NFL is my only concern when you're playing at a conference that isn't quite the level of the other conferences in the country.
Yeah, you could almost compare him even to like Sam Darnold, guy at USC, all the hype in the world, played good a lot of the time, but not like a legendary figures. And like you said, sometimes when a guy has all these pluses and minuses, it hardly ever ends up as the best case scenario. It's usually not the worst case scenario, so it's often somewhere in the middle. And I think with his hype being more grounded and more down to earth, people don't expect this guy to step in and be Phillip Rivers by week 8, so that might be helpful.
Exactly.
So I think in a way it's a safe choice. 2-part question here before we get off football for a little while. Have you been, because I ask you this every time you come on, have you been to a Charger game since they've moved to LA?
I keep saying I've got to, but
you still have to.
The problem is they're playing at that little school, that little stadium there. I don't even know what to call it.
Right. Well, it's not like there's not seats available, so you can't even use that as an excuse.
I know. It's, I just know that I won't be sitting next to Charger fans.
That's true.
Seats.
That's very true.
But I would have been able to assure you before, of course, one of the biggest situations in sports history happened a few months ago. But I could have assured you then, and I'm pretty confident now that this coming NFL season, I will go to that spanking new SoFi Stadium and take a look at, I think, the team, but definitely, where they're playing at. So I can almost assure you that for this year, if they let fans in, which is something we got to figure out as well.
Yeah, definitely. And the second part of that was going to be, is Justin Herbert going to get you to a game? But it sounds like the stadium itself is going to be enough to get you to a game. But that works. I mean, you got to realize, as an Eagles fan living in Florida, I don't always get the opportunity. I've seen my team live twice in my life, and you are right. Don't dismiss the fact that you are as close as you are to your team. While it's there. So hopefully you get to see it when you do. Kramer actually spent some time out in Vegas over the fall, and he went to the Coliseum to see the Rams play the Seahawks, I believe it was. So he came back and told us his story and his experience there. So hopefully if you do get to see that new stadium, you can share your experiences there with us as well.
Well, maybe I should go to a Chargers-Eagles game and give you the best of both worlds.
There you go.
Whenever they play those guys.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but you can count on me if they have seats available because actually, truth be told, my dad actually has season tickets to the Rams.
Oh, okay.
He's sold pretty much all of them, to make some good money.
Sure,
but,
I do that with the UCF games I can't go to also. It's like this past year I went to maybe, I think 4 of 6, but the 2 I didn't go to paid for my season tickets. So like there's definitely a way to be smart about that. So I totally get selling some of them.
I know this is a sports channel, but, speaking a little bit of business, that's a pretty good side hustle to have.
It really is.
If you want to make some money.
Yeah. So if your dad has Rams tickets, is he a Rams fan, or is that just the team he happened to get the tickets for?
Oh, no. Just unlike the Chargers, the Rams playing at the Coliseum had significantly less money and much more turnout than the Chargers. For some reason, maybe you could draw your own conclusions, but there wasn't as much demand for Chargers that there was for Rams until now that, both teams are in the same building.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so to pivot away from football for a little bit, about an hour ago, about an hour and a half now, we got the news that the NBA is officially going to be all the way back in July. They haven't given a date, but they keep saying July. 22 teams, 9 from the East, 13 from the West. They will have an 8-game regular season to help lock in all the seeds. This is more needed for the Western Conference, as you can see with only 9 in the East. They're just about set. We'll get into the semantics of that later. But if this will be at Disney in my backyard in Orlando, I assume with no fans. That hasn't been mentioned, but I think it's understood that that's the case. And the longest this season could go, if the finals goes all the way to Game 7, the season would be over October 12th. So that's a big bulk of the information we have now. What are your thoughts initially of the NBA finally figuring this out and are going to get back to playing some ball here in July?
Well, first of all, in comparison to the other major sports, especially the MLB, I mean, for all of the particular posturing I could have about when they should have started, how they should have started, the fact that they're starting is better than a lot of other programs and organizations. So that's huge.
Definitely.
There's news which is interesting that we'll get to about what happens after the finals concludes in early October, which I also think is very interesting. But as far as the season starting, I think they're going about it around as safe as they can. I guess they could have done 16 teams to be the most safe, but the fact that they're including 6 other clubs makes everybody happy, and that's the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And I think the NBA went about it in a pretty effective way, taking all things into consideration. All 30 teams and the clubs that aren't interested in competing versus the teams that do. Steve Kerr was very vocal about, his team not really even preparing for the season to resume. So they took that into consideration. They took the consideration of teams that were vying for playoff spots. They also considered particular soccer clubs from overseas. I don't have the particulars of it, but allegedly teams that resumed their sports for this coming summer had 3 times the injuries that they did before they shut everything down. I forget exactly what organizations. Do you have any idea what I'm referring to, Phil?
Just off the top of my head, the biggest major league across the country would be the Bundesliga in Germany. That is basically back full force, just with no fans. I know Premier League and Serie A in Italy actually start on my birthday. They start June 20th is when they come back. So happy birthday to me. But right. I would assume that is coming from Germany because that is the biggest league that has started the quickest, if that makes sense.
Right, yeah. So that probably, the German league is probably the one. But regardless, injuries, I mean, even with that example put out, there still is, consensus opinion that injuries are going to be ramped up. But the fact that there's almost 2 months of training camp before the resumption of the season with 8 regular season games, that takes that into consideration. Yes, it also conflicts with football, but it does partner with the television deals and partners with the teams of the NBA, knowing that this was the most lucrative option because, having a quick playoff run in July and August was not going to make the type of money that this extended schedule does. So it takes literally every opinion and need of all the different mouths to feed into consideration. I think they did about as good of a job as they could have.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to say, like, the NHL, for example, whenever they get going, their plan has been made known that they're going to start with the playoffs. They kind of have a group stage so that the first game you play, you're not going to go home for losing it, for getting back in shape. But they're essentially starting with the playoffs. I think a lot of people thought the NBA might do that, but the way they're doing it, like I said, 8-game season. You look at the Eastern standings, the 7th and 8th seed, the Brooklyn Nets and the Orlando Magic, both have 30 wins. The 9th seed Wizards have 24. So they're really only getting in if one of those 7th or 8th seed completely tanks and they basically win out, is what they would need.
Right.
Whereas the West, which I'm sure is the teams you're more familiar with, being on the West Coast, there's 13 because there's a lot more moving and shaking that can be done. And I think it's worth saying there's certainly a part of the league that wants to make sure Zion gets in the playoffs. I think that is a big part to this. The fact that he started the season late. The Pelicans are currently sitting at the 10th seed. They're, looks like, 4 games out of the playoffs currently. So with that 8-game season, it really, when that 8-game play-in tournament, if you almost want to call it that, starts, it's going to have a sense of urgency that we're going to go from no sports to really hitting the ground running. So, I mean, I think once it gets going, people will understand why they went this route.
Yeah, first of all, the rumors have it that if you are, once you get into that play-in tournament after the 8 regular season games, if you are a certain amount of games back, you enter that play-in tournament, and then the higher seed in that play-in tournament only needs to beat the lower seed once, but the lower seed needs to beat the higher seed twice. I don't know if I gave you a headache, Phil, but I already have my head spinning from all these different rules. But the point is, I think adding all this, like you said, is an opportunity to put in a Zion Williamson. But I also believe that it just gives the interest of of competition, too, for other clubs to even have a shot to make the playoffs. And, yes, it may be technically a bit more risky having 6 more teams in the facilities with a chance to catch the virus and spread it. But it seems like with the type of precautions that they are having, that risk is pretty low. And it still gives a chance, like, the snoozy Sacramento Kings or the San Antonio Spurs, where we only know the coach and maybe 1 or 2 players on the roster. It even gives those teams a chance to make the playoffs, even though I think we're all universally agreeing that Zion is the guy that we would love to see upset the apple cart and make the playoffs with Alonzo Ball and all the guys that we know and love from the Lakers.
Yeah, that's true. And the other thing is, with that whole, they only got to beat the lower seeded team once as opposed to twice. As confusing as that is, I can see the point of this, because what they want to do is reward these higher seeded teams that worked all regular season back when the world was normal. Reward them for having those higher seeds, because normally you would get home court advantage. Technically, the Magic have the greatest home field advantage because we're playing in Orlando every single night. So clearly, home field advantage is out the window. I would be shocked if there's fans that even in the finals, let's say. So that's out the window. So I understand they got to get creative to reward these higher seeded teams. The big question, and I think this really just depends if you're a glass half full or half empty guy, when it's all said and done, does this championship have an asterisk on it regardless of who holds it? I think some people, if LeBron wins it, they're not going to say a peep about it. And obviously, if the Sacramento Kings run the table and win the championship, there could be, you can look at it sideways and people would understand. Do you think this championship will be any less than even, say, like a lockout shortened season that we've had, that we're familiar with from only a couple years ago?
Yeah, completely agreed. I think that the only way that you could figure out a way to get rid of that asterisk and limit the chances of somebody like Sacramento running the table is to figure out some sort of way to create an advantage for the higher seed in the playoffs. Because, it seems like unless there was some new proposal, every team is going to have the access to the same facilities, to the same training courts, to the same food, to the same hotels. So, and obviously the same amount of fans. I have a tough time. There's a lot of different proposals from, a team having 3 possessions versus another team's 1 coming out of quarters to coaches' challenges to an additional personal foul for a particular player. I mean, it's just hard to implement that first and second seed advantage. So as difficult as it is, I think there's no real good solution outside of putting fans in an arena. So I think even with the Lakers or the Bucks potentially winning the finals, I still think the championship won't hold as much weight, which is pretty unfortunate. But hey, it's going to hold at least more weight than not playing the season at all. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I think initially, you're always going to get haters regardless of who wins. I think history will be, friendly to this whole situation. I think years down the line, we're not going to think of it that way. People forget that LeBron's first title came in that lockout shortened season. That never even gets mentioned anymore. I think time would eventually prop up this champion as good as any others, but I could see how initially it won't be received quite as well. Quick readout of these teams for those that don't know. In the East, you have the Bucks, Raptors, Celtics, Heat, Pacers, Sixers, Nets, and Magic, and then the 9th seed vying for a spot is the Washington Wizards. Over in the West, where you have 13 teams, got the Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, Jazz, Thunder, Rockets, Mavericks, Grizzlies, which is the 8th seed. The teams vying for a spot still are the Portland Trail Blazers, the New Orleans Pelicans, Sacramento Kings, San Antonio Spurs, and Phoenix Suns. So that is all the teams that we are going to see in this Mickey Mouse Cup of a tournament, and I don't mean that as an insult, because it is being played at Disney World, which in a way is pretty cool. Right. And definitely an obvious choice. I mean, ESPN and Disney are partners. There is no reason why the parks, will be. I think they'll be open by the time this thing gets going, but they will have their World of Sports areas and all their courts set up to do this. One thing that I think will help the higher seeded teams is if these playoff series are a full 7 games. I know there was discussions of, do we shorten them to speed up the process? Because when you have let's say a sudden death tournament like March Madness, any team can beat a team once. That's what makes it so exciting. I think when you have a 7-game series, no matter how lucky, we keep taking shots at them, but I guess we'll just keep swinging. The Kings are not, if you put the Kings against the Clippers, they could maybe beat them once, but in a 7-game series, you tend to know who the better team is. So I still think everything will come out in the wash, but it could make for some interesting matchups and maybe an upset here or there.
Yeah, we all know that better team is not the Kings. All right.
Now we know. Going. Yeah.
The funny thing is, even though it seems very likely that, not just the Kings, but all the teams that are out of the top 8 in each conference, I mean, there is almost no chance with the 4.5 games back in the West and 5 games back in the East. I mean, the chances of them even making this is relatively low. This is for the interest of competition, it seems, more than anything. But it is fascinating to see the potential matchups in both conferences come down to most likely that 8th regular season game for this trip to Orlando, because the differences in the West, the differences between seeds 4 and 7 is a mere 2.5 games. And in the East, the difference is, as we look here, the difference between a 4 seed and also a 6 seed is nothing. It's 2 games. So you could have a whole bunch of jostling. And I don't even mention the teams above and behind them, which could still change their standings. So these 8 games are pretty important. And I think we get an experiment here that maybe a shortened season, because this won't go to 82 games, maybe a little shortened season, or maybe some sort of an in-season tournament, like an 8 regular season game to determine standings, could really play into the interest of quite a few fans. But that's something that we'll figure out here in the next couple months.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, there's not, a huge discrepancy of teams that are out that could potentially get in, but there can be a lot of seed shuffling in these 8 games that will it can make endless possibilities for playoff matchups. So when you factor that in, and like you said, this is the interest of fairness and competition for the teams that were still jostling for it. I mean, I think if these teams were basically set, I don't think we would have had to go this route, but I think enough teams were in the mix that this was probably the right call.
Yeah, 4 and 5 games, that's not enough with 20-something games to go to just dismiss them if there was a chance. I think this new format is fascinating on a couple of fronts. The first one is, the opportunity of maybe having some in-season tournament or shortening the regular season schedule a bit to create some intrigue. Also, dancing around potentially having in the future like the 9 and 8 teams having some play-in tournament at the end of the year. That would also be pretty interesting. That's something we'll take a look at here. And then also something that it seems never gets mentioned. I mean, the NBA in the finals and throughout the playoffs, there are no neutral site games. And the NFL has a neutral site for the Super Bowl along with college football. And I mean, that's just what makes those games so interesting, because it includes the whole country and for the biggest event of the year. And I think this could be interesting, and that we at least experiment. Hey, a neutral site for the champion could be something that maybe we look into in the future. I don't know if it happens, but maybe we do, like in a Vegas or Orlando in the future, or one of those major cities.
Yeah, I think you would definitely find fans that would be into that, and then you would obviously find the old school or purist type of basketball that know like home field matters, winning on your home floor or winning on the opponent's home floor is what it's all about. Which I could see both sides of the argument. I don't think I'm hitching my wagon to either truck currently, but I could definitely see the argument for either way.
Yeah, neutral site would you don't even have to do 7 games on a neutral site. How about game 1 or 2 or something like that? Just these are different things that only during a pandemic do you have the discussions with, it seems.
Yeah.
Where I never heard any realistic conversations about blending the conferences during the playoffs. But when they released a week or two ago the seedings and the matchups for the opening rounds, I mean, most of them were East-East, West-West anyways, but you had a Lakers-Nets matchup where Kevin Durant could potentially be enticed to return. That is way more fascinating than what would have happened if the conferences were aligned. But we don't ever talk about that because, we don't want to upset the apple cart before a pandemic. But during a time like this, those discussions are talked about, which I think, I don't root for another absolute medical crisis, but, there are quite a few positives that come out of having a season go on hiatus.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely opened up to new ideas. I would not be shocked if some of these stay. I mean, we've always heard the, get rid of at least divisions, and get rid of maybe conferences, just take the top 16 teams. It's been mentioned before, but it's almost always quickly shut down. It's something that you hear on First Take. It's not something that's ever been on the desk of the commissioner until now. So if that's a small positive that we can take out of this, that it makes basketball postseason better, I guess we can take that and run with it. To pivot again away from basketball now, anyone who's listened to this show for an extended period of time knows that I've known Nick for a very long time, which is surprising considering we live on opposite coasts in the country. And we've never really gotten to tell. Usually when I have you on, I think last time it was last year's draft. It was when the Chargers moved. There was big stories to tell, and now we have our own big story to tell. We've never gotten to tell the story on how we know each other and the project that we've kind of worked on. You've worked on the entire time, and I've thrown some help in from time to time. So Nick is the creator of what's known as the Dream Season Football League, which is a YouTube series on the channel Charger Dude 95, where you will find all this content. And I don't think I could do it the justice that you can, Nick. So take it away. What is the Dream Season Football League?
Well, by the way, thank you for giving me my plug here on this awesome channel. So. The DSFL was something implemented by, the initial founders. I actually, to this day, I don't remember who first gave me the idea. But when I initially created a channel, I posted some videos. I don't even know how I came up with the idea, but I posted videos back when Madden NFL 10 was a thing of greatest teams franchise. And I would simulate the greatest teams. I would create rosters of, the teams for a single season in the NFL that you could think of. Like back in the 80s, the Bears, the 49ers were dynasties. I would take the greatest years, the versions of those franchises, and put them together and simulate them against each other, along with all the other clubs in the league. And, I got an idea from somebody, one of the first fans of the DSFL, to create this league, and the Dream Season Football League was born from there, and I am just finishing up my 5th series of creating all different types of ideas. From DSFL 1 was the greatest teams for a single season, DSFL 2, the greatest players of each franchise come together, DSFL 3 was the greatest teams that ever won the Super Bowl, and the DSFL 4 was a remake of the DSFL 1 with only a couple teams of the greatest single team of all time. And then most recently I've done greatest teams of the last 20 years. And it's been a blast throughout the way. And this series has really taken off, and it's been fun to do it. And it's been a decade, and I can't wait for a decade more of it.
Yeah, and right now we are currently working on the Dream Bowl 5, which, again, 10 years in the making. We've had 5 seasons total. I think somewhere in the... So you had already started your first actual league of this, so this is prior to me being involved. You're saying originally you would just make, let's say, the 07 Patriots and the 85 Bears and see who would win. Like, you would just kind of do exhibition, like, who would win in this matchup? Is that how it got started?
Yes, I did something really quick of that back in 2009, and somebody stumbled on the videos, and, you know, those early videos really caught fire, and I think a lot of fans have been very much a part of it ever since. And you know, I don't remember who exactly did it, but all of a sudden now it's become a big deal and something people look into every year.
And I remember the part I remember, again, it was somewhere within the first season, and, like, you know, your channel was still small enough that you would see every comment or be able to reply. And when someone says, hey, try this, you know, you would give it a try. And I remember just sending you a message and say, hey, I love the content, love the videos. If you ever need help with anything, let me know. And I don't remember the first thing we did. I do remember the first big thing we did is the first Dream Bowl championship. We announced together, you doing play-by-play, me doing color. And we've done that everyone since, including this Dream Bowl 5 that we're working on. Spoiler alert, it's a good one. Definitely check it out. So yeah, it's been 10 years, 5 seasons. We already kind of have an idea on what we're going to do next. We're not going to disclose that yet. Maybe next time Nick comes on. But the Dream Bowl itself was going to be released in quarters. Each video is a quarter, I believe, is how it's set up. And it's going to be released on his YouTube channel this weekend. So definitely check it out. What day is it? Friday or Saturday? You're going to start putting those up.
Hey, it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Okay,
we get the whole game in, and yeah. I mean, there's a lot of firsts in that game, and it's fascinating just to see the two teams that even were regarded as the best over the last 20 years, and then the simulation really just is a good one. So make sure to check it out. Yeah,
it's definitely again a matchup you would not expect to see. And all the past seasons that we're talking about are still on the channel if you want to check those out. I was going to say we can talk about the past 4, but I don't want to give any matchups away if people want to go back and see those. But I'm just thinking this won't really give anything away. The first year, it was, would you say, Madden 10, or right? Is that what we said, Madden 10 was the first one? And then did you move up every year, or did you stick with Madden 10 for those others, or how did that come into effect?
No, it is actually pretty cool. Every DSFL featured a different Madden. From the first one was 10, the second one was 12, the third one was, if I'm not mistaken, 16. The fourth one was 19, and then this one was 20. And it's cool to see the progression of the game. And to be honest, since we've been taking shots at the Kings and at First Take, let's go ahead and keep this theme going and take a shot at Madden. There are some things with Madden that they get rid of, and it has not progressed, but over the last decade, Madden has regressed in some different ways.
Definitely.
But it's interesting to see that. So it's not just, watching the simulation of the teams, but to see the progression of the game itself, which is pretty cool. I'd say, I don't look at the numbers, but I'd say it's the most popular sports game out there. So to see the progression of that is pretty cool.
Yeah, and even as you said, not every Madden that comes out is necessarily better than the one before it, but one thing, they always end up with their own unique style. Some it's easier to run, some it's easier to pass, some it's easier to have great defensive plays. Sometimes it's harder to kick. They all have their little tweaks, and with each game having its own style, each Dream Bowl season also had its own personality. And I think, the shakiness of Madden, the inconsistency of Madden almost helped with that, giving each season, because they were all different themes, and it gave each season a different style and different personality.
Yeah, for instance, Madden 10 was, I don't know how much you played it, but to me, I felt like a sense of reward playing with somebody else about getting a good hit. And it seems like there was no game that was as effective of shaking the screen and making you feel like you took the hit than in Madden 2010. And they really haven't replicated that feeling ever since. So, great game, and to no surprise, the 76 Raiders were physical, the 85 Bears were physical, and those are the two teams that made it to the big game. I'll have no more spoilers of the matchups for those of you who want to go back, but those themes sort of played out across the way.
Yeah, and with this year's Madden, or this year's Dream Bowl being in the current Madden 20, the biggest flack on this version of the game is that they brought back those, in 08 they called them like superstar icons or whatever, where certain players had certain stats or certain boosts that made them kind of cheesy and unplayable. Did you run into like issues with that? Like, were there certain guys that just took over in a way that you just felt that the game made happen? Like, did you run into any issues because Madden 20 wasn't considered the easiest simulation version of the game?
Oh, yes. I actually am surprised you brought this up, but it was one of the common frustrations that I had throughout the year. And, I played Madden 20 a good amount and noticed it, but then it became obvious by about week 4 of simulating this year that abilities were completely overpowering. And a guy like Patrick Mahomes, who is great, he went the entire regular season without throwing a single interception. And it felt to me that was a bit unrealistic. So at that moment, I changed some of his ratings and dumbed down some of his accuracy to create a more realistic feeling.
Yeah.
The same thing goes with linebacker Luke Kuechly, who has, I forget what ability it is, something about pursuit, and he had 12 forced fumbles, which if he played in the real NFL would have been the most for a single season in NFL history. And this was a 10-game regular season, not 17, or 16. So there were numerous situations where the abilities were incredibly overpowering. I think I did a good job late in the year of adjusting the ratings accordingly. But yes, Madden 20, the abilities, which I hear are coming back for Madden 21, by the way, but those abilities were one of the big takeaways from this year.
I mean, I don't know if you have a favorite Madden game. Mine, for whatever reason, and over the years, it's kind of garnered more love and affection, but Madden 08 on the past consoles, so not the PS3 and 360 version, but the PS2 Madden 08, because it had those player icons, but they actually, they made sense who had them, and while they were there and they were noticeable, they weren't, overpowering. Like, you'd have a Willis McGahee be able to truck somebody over more, or Brian Dawkins or Ray Lewis will deliver more hits. Obviously, Chad Johnson had no problem with one-handed catches. The guys that had things made sense, and it didn't feel overpowered because that's how they played in real life. So Madden 08's always been my favorite. Madden 09 was fine. I think the first one I owned was 06. I don't know if you have a favorite, from all the ones you've played.
Oh, yes, I have a top 3.
Okay.
First is Madden 10. Second, I don't know if this counts, but NFL 2K5 is second. And then third is Madden 04. I love those 3 in order. 08 was really solid for the points you just mentioned, but Madden 10, just from everything. I mean, it had exceptional presentation to gameplay that was very entertaining to play with yourself and play with others. And, across the board, franchise, there are components in franchise that they have yet to return. When you play in Madden 10, you can dive for the first down and the chain gang comes out. When you dive to the goal line, the officials converse and figure out if it's a touchdown or not. Those are things that have yet to be implemented. There's a completely inclusive halftime show. When you're in a franchise, it takes a complete look around the league, and with 2 different hosts that communicate about all of the storylines throughout a particular week. Those sound like pretty good ideas, right?
Yeah.
That was in Madden a decade ago, and they have yet to return to that. So all those things mentioned I think Madden 10 was the best game, but '08 is right there in my top 5.
Yeah, '08, and like you said, the things that haven't returned, like in '08, the franchise mode specifically, you could play in the Pro Bowl, you could play the college all-star game with the guys that are going to be drafted, essentially the Senior Bowl without the name. Just the franchise mode was so deep. And you mentioned 2K5, I could do a whole episode on that. That is the best football game, but if we're only talking Madden, then I would say '08 definitely, '06, and then I liked '04, but nobody ever did anything in '04 but run around with Michael Vick. I think we can all agree that if you take him out of that, it's not as well known, but it's still a great game. Like it's weird how up and down it goes, but overall we've been able to enjoy the series. And our friend Hank, who's been on my show and he's going to be the sideline reporter for the Dream Bowl. He actually had his own halftime reporter. Thank you. So definitely, if you're a fan of Two Birds and a Third, check him out. He'll be a part of this. It's good to get all these people incorporated on a project like this. But even he did almost a spin-off of it in Tecmo Bowl, like a emulation of Tecmo Bowl that me and you both had a part in, which was also a lot of fun. He ran a season of that. He realized how much work goes into doing that, which is something I've always commended you for. Your ability to get these rosters done and all the graphics that you make and stuff. It's very immersive, and you put a lot of effort into it. So I think the more people see it, the better, because it's definitely been, like you said, a fun 10 years, and I think we still got a few more tricks up our sleeve.
Yeah, I think so. Even though it seems like we've touched nearly every topic. The other thing before we wrap up the Madden segment of our podcast is that Madden 10 and going down to Madden 4, sorry, not Madden 10, John Madden and Pat Summerall, that made for just a broadcast duo that Madden has yet to even come close to, in my honest opinion. They've rustled through about a half dozen different announcers. All of them range from solid to, shall I say, not good at all. But none have equated to that. And to me, very few can even equate to how good John Madden was particularly. But yeah, it just seems like that was the heyday of announcing for Madden.
Yeah, no doubt. I think the only guy that holds a candle really to it is Gus Johnson. I did like the games that he got to do. '08, I think, was one of those. So he's someone that I at least enjoyed. He gave the game some personality and some flavor. So like he didn't last long because we're not allowed to have nice things, I guess. But so that's how that went. So Nick, before we get out of here, I already mentioned Charger Dude 95 is where you catch all the Dream Bowl stuff. What's your other social media so that when they watch this, they can let you know how much they enjoyed it?
By the way, if you can't, if Charger 95 doesn't come to mind, if you look at Dream Season Football League or DSFL, 4 letters, DSFL, on YouTube, my content, I'm not trying to, brag too much here, but that's the first, my videos are all across that search board, so it'll be easy to find from there. Anyways, Twitter handle, Nick the Kid Rice, you can find me from there, and of course on YouTube as well. And I just can't wait to have people join us for the Dream Bowl this weekend. It should be a whole lot of fun with you, me, and Hank, as always, did just an exceptional job throughout that call. Yeah,
really great stuff. I'm really excited to see people's opinion on how this all went down. I think that's going to wrap it up for this one, guys. Thanks for listening. As always, as he mentioned, you search DSFL to find his content. Go on YouTube, search Phil Talk Sports. You'll see this podcast, an entire playlist of ones from the past. You can also get it on Apple Podcast. And I think I'm on Spotify now. If not, I'm working on it, so keep checking if not. So, Nick, thanks for being here. Look forward to seeing Dream Bowl 5, and we'll catch you guys next time.